Hello, everyone. I am Mark Intrican, and we are here for the Achieving Unity Weekly Podcast. Going to have an exciting meeting today. We're going to start right now at the top of the hour and go for 1 hour and go through some exciting information because I have a wonderful guest. Looking at the screen right now, you can get the free Achieving Unity guide if you go out to markintrican.com. Page just a little bit forward down there, down on in the screens, and you'll see this. Put your name and email address in there. You get a free copy of our Achieving Unity Guide now. Looking good for all of us. Who is Achieving Unity? Where does it come from? Well, it comes from creating solutions one reality at a time. My company, Reality Focused Dynamics, Solution Focused, Success Focused Solutions. And what we do is we transform the world. I am the Chief Transformational Officer, and I work toward achieving unity through encouragement, inspiration, and inclusion. Our podcast is weekly. Right now, it is every Thursday through the end of the month, which means we only have two more this year. So we're closing down to the end of 2024 quite rapidly. In 2025, they will move to Wednesdays. So the first one will be January 8th. We will not have one on New Year's Day. Well, when I talk about success-focused solutions and reality-focused dynamics, that's where we want to go. And please contact us for more information. What can we do? Well, using Agile and Lean outside of software. As mostly engineers and software engineers have worked in the past, we've used what's called Agile to build upon completing tasks in smaller minimum quantities. Agile's ability to create and respond to changes and improvements. It enables success in uncertain and possibly struggling environments by emphasizing adaptability through better collaboration and communication. I'll show this in a minute to be even more even on the family side. Lean is a methodology focused on maximizing value by minimizing waste and optimizing your processes through continuous improvement, effectiveness, and efficiencies. I wrote an article on this and it is on my blog, the Agile Manifesto, personally and professionally. Please feel free to look it up. Have questions? Contact me. I'd love to tell you more. As I said, connect with me and I'll show you how to break all products and services, personally and professionally, down from the most complex business projects, including rocket scientists. I have worked for Lockheed Martin and Boeing, to the basic steps of training our teenagers. Yes, they can be trained. Even me. My parents did a great job. Well, at least I think so. Think of busy mornings at a family breakfast. Everyone has somewhere to go, from work to school to many other locations. You ever thought about having a family stand-up meeting the night before, each evening, to, during which everyone shares their task for the next day? You place sticky notes with your chores for the next morning, your responsibilities on the refrigerator. And each person can move their little sticky note from to do to done in the morning as things are accomplished. You can create a breakfast station with pre-portioned ingredients and a weekly meal plan, helping people get through the process and minimizing decision fatigue and reducing time spent searching for items that can help everyone participate in a smoother, more efficient process. Achieving unity through the encouragement, inspiration, and inclusion, including others. Encouragement can be the powerful force that fuels the core of empowerment, empowering each other, inspiring each other in achieving every goal. Unity makes us a successful team. Include others and celebrate every victory, both personally and professionally, because together we can overcome every challenge. Do you know someone's facing relationship challenges? Maybe parenting difficulties? Are you or someone you know struggling with relationship issues or parenting time issues as a divorced or divorcing parent? We can transform that frustration into understanding with what the frustration? Where is the value in our actions besides the frustrations that we get into? We must realize that anger holds no value. Anger is just actions not gaining effective results. ANGER. actions not gaining effective results. From personal relationships to prenuptial agreements, and nuptials are not required, but life happens. Let's learn to embrace and enjoy every moment and every challenge together as we do reach success-focused solutions. If you'd like, here are my two QR codes. One's for the website home on your left, the other's for your website contact page on the right. But achieving unity, again, through the power, and it is a strong power. People don't think about it. It's not a wimpy way out, but it's that power of encouraging, inspiring, and including others, personally and professionally. Some of our upcoming podcast. Next week, we'll have Jill Lublin, and she'll talk about happy holidays, a time for all of us through kindness. The week after that, we go to Strive to Thrive 2025.com, closing yesterday, 2024, building tomorrow, which is 2025. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there will not be a podcast on the first week of January. We'll enjoy the start of our new year. But on January 8th, we'll have a fresh start with relationships. Amy Scowen will help us start the year off right and how to get along better. Again, that'll be on January 8th. That's a Wednesday. The next week will be Naked Leadership. Shift Your Mindset with Carol Metz Murray. That'll be on the 15th of January. So put these on your calendar, schedule. I want to see you every week if at all possible. Love hearing from you. Love talking with you. And now for our special guest. Chenthu Jayton is a 15-year practitioner in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, the DEIJ, management and education, with a Bachelor of Science in Political Science, a Master of Science in Counseling. He started his work in DEI advocacy in education administration at several higher education institutions, serving in a variety of roles, including community director, director of cultural center and spiritual life, and program director. His last few roles involved him serving as a senior DEI official at those institutions. His work included inclusive community building, intercultural and cross-cultural education, equitably policy design, and organization culture assessment. With all of this background, he has transitioned out of the higher education. Chenthu served as the executive director of Equity Labs, a DEIJ consulting and upskilling organization serving for profit, nonprofit, and governmental agencies of varying sizes and industries. In his role, he led the development of a full DEI upskilling curriculum, a first of its kind DEI dashboard assessing organizational metrics at interpersonal, and epistemic and institutional levels, and a personal management strategy centering on love as an ethic of practice. Chenthu is pursuing his doctoral education in business management. His research focus is management systems that facilitate DEI advancement within organizations. Wow, what a huge amount of education and knowledge in what we're doing. So let me stop the sharing quickly, and let's introduce our special guest of the day, Chenthu Jayton. Chenthu, how are you today?
I'm good, Mark. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in the conversation. I'm truly humbled, and I'm really excited to just kind of talk with you about DEIJ and the world and how we make sense of it all.
I am so glad you're here. It's just awesome to have someone with your knowledge, your education, the ability, your background. I can't tell you enough how excited and honored I am for you to be here. This is exciting.
Indeed.
So I'm pinning myself up here. Make sure I'll get everything done. Beautiful. Getting all the technology set up for this wonderful presentation. Chenthu, tell me, could you just give me I told a little bit about you, but what inspired you to pursue a career in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And a lot of people have heard the DEI, but you're in with a
Yeah,
DEIJ. Tell us, what
yeah.
pursued you to get into this career?
Yeah, so like most DEIJ practitioners, our purpose comes from our history, right? And for me, that meant, I grew up in Sri Lanka in the midst of a civil war. Like I was born in 1979, the civil war in Sri Lanka started that year. And it was a civil war based on ethnicity between minoritized Tamil people and majority Sinhalese people. Um, and right, it was a war that lasted until 2009, cost several thousands of lives as a process. Um, and to me, I learned very early on, as a Tamil person from Sri Lanka, what it means to not belong. Um, right? It was very evident very early in my life that there were some spaces that I was not welcome, I didn't have access to. And even if I did have access to, I would constantly be pushed to the margins. Um, and it
You
was in
didn't
the
have access to those, sorry to interrupt you, but you didn't have access to those because,
because of my ethnicity. It was really that simple, right? In Sri Lanka, we carry around these identity cards that identified us by ethnicity. And at any given time, right, like you could be walking across the street and a police officer can stop you and ask to see your ID. And then based on what it said, the rest of the interaction follows. For instance, right, like in high school, our high school had both Tamil and Sinhalese people, and it was the British system of education, so you could be appointed prefects, but there was a disproportionality on who gets to be prefects based on ethnicity. There
what
was a
does that
dispro
mean when you're appointed pre?
A prefect is kind of like a student leader, someone who
Okay.
uh, kind of manages kind of the day-to-day lives of younger students, really. Um, but there was a disproportionality on who became prefects based on ethnicity. There's a disproportionality on who gets to go to university uh, because there were kind of ethnic quotas right. So the idea of that just because I was born Tamil meant I didn't have access to some things became very
Okay. Help me again with these
clear.
terms. You were born what?
Tamil. So in Sri Lanka, there are two ethnicities, Tamil and
Okay.
Sinhalese,
Okay.
and the ethnic war was based on these ethnicities. It was Tamil people and Sinhalese people, um, and that in itself is a historical relic of British occupation of the island. But that's a history lesson for another time, perhaps. Uh,
It's interesting though how all of this comes about because
yeah.
we've talked, as we talked about my speeches before, there's so many things about our lives that are nothing more than social constructs. And it's just
Mm.
somebody's opinion that comes along. So I'm appreciating that as you're talking about this, the definitions that you're sharing with us kind of opens up other doors that many of us have no idea about that life
Mm.
of how you grew up. Please continue.
Yeah. And so I grew up in that environment until I was 19. And right, like once you realize that your opportunities to succeed are capped just because of who you are, um, um, I and all all my family, we left Sri Lanka and we came to the United States. Um, and I moved to Wisconsin, Superior, Wisconsin, all the way up north, uh, right? And
You
what I
went from Sri
realized,
Lanka, which is very warm, to the far north,
yes,
which is very cold. Okay.
yes, I did indeed. I distinctly remember the day that I realized I was living inside of a refrigerator. Um, and so I moved to Wisconsin, and there I found out kind of the relics of uh, the American kind of slavery followed me there, right? Why? Because I'm a very dark-skinned Sri Lankan. Um, for the non-discerning eye, I looked like a black person. Um, and so then there was a different kind of exclusion and marginalization that I experienced there. Um, so what I realized is that wherever I went, I was looking for belonging, access, inclusion. And eventually I just stopped trying to find it and decided I might just have to create it, that I might just have to build it. Um, and that is kind of my journey to DEIJ work, is that I'm not going to kind of wait for it to happen. I'm going to do what I can to make it.
Wow, that's excellent. What took you across that line, so to speak? Here's a lot of people that have been raised in maybe a similar lifestyle as you have. They don't do anything. What was that took you across that line? What was that trigger? What happened?
Um, Part of it, I think, is a little bit of fatigue, right? Like just looking and looking and looking. Part of it is a uh, kind of just a yearning. Like if I can't find it, then I'm going to build it. And I think a part of it is a little bit of the the American ethos in some ways, right? Like that is the economic term, the greater fool, uh, right? Like the greater fool is someone who believes they can succeed where everybody else has failed. Um, and I am either that naive or that arrogant to think that I might be able to do something about it. Um,
And I look up to that though. I mean, Shandu, that is the feeling, that is the basis I think we all need to grab onto. I'm told you, I'm very impressed by what you've done. You did take that step. You had that trigger that took
yeah,
you to the next step. Please continue.
yeah, and and I think the I want to kind of acknowledge, however, that um, people do the work of creating belonging just by their embodiment, right? Like certainly I've made a career out of it. Uh, but right, like if you're black or queer or trans, sometimes just existing, right, being in spaces that have always told you you don't belong is in itself a kind of resistance. That's a kind of work to say, no, no, I do belong. You are going to listen to me. You are going to take me seriously. So I don't want to discount the work that all of those people are doing on a daily basis, um, right? But I do think, right, like we still have to kind of collect all of that wisdom, all of that experience, and put it up on a shining pedestal and say, this is kind of the ideals of the American ethos that we need to aspire to. It, the arrogance, of course, is an immigrant telling Americans that, but somebody has to, right?
I think that's the one thing that we all need. And when I talk about reality focused dynamics and creating solutions one reality at a time, I guess that's why I look up to you in the process because what you said is so true. We have all been raised on our cultures and our learnings, and they become somewhat of a habit. And we know better, but we follow that comfort level instead of
Yes.
asking those questions. So I'm impressed that you have taken that extra step, that extra energy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's what we need to do. I mean, please continue, but that's what I look up to, and that's what I hope I can bring to more people. I hope we can bring to more people, the ones that listen to this, and the ones we share this with, and those that also share it, that we can take that, what do you call it, the ethos,
yes, the
and
American ethos. Yeah, that's what I call it.
mhm,
Yeah, and uh, and to me, right, like the process of um, working towards that ideal begins with uh, an honest accounting of our histories, right? Because we talk about how race is a social construction, or gender or sexuality or ethnicity is a social construction. Uh, that construction project started centuries ago in our histories, right? And
it did.
what we have done is we've built a set of um, evaluations and coded them into every aspect of our lives, right? And culture is always created in this dual process of performance evaluation. We do something and then we evaluate it as good, bad, better, worse, etc. And then what we do is we create a set of rules, policies, government or governance uh, that entrench those evaluations into our ways of life, right? So that is the social construction project. And the evaluations have too often been based on our social identities: masculinity, femininity, male, female, color, race, ability, sexuality, etc. Right? And then what we do is we say these are good, these are bad, these are better, these are worse. And we have kind of encoded all of that into our laws, our practices. And that's the social construction project, right?
Mhm.
So the work of DEIJ is to disrupt that, to say, no, no, these kinds of evaluations based on identities don't work. They are harmful, they're hurtful, and they don't really serve the greater good, uh, the larger enterprise, right? That, I think, is the DEIJ project.
And that's excellent because again, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then you work in there that, as mentioned
Yes.
earlier, the J for justice. And I think
Yeah.
that the J is a great way to close the DEI because that's all that DEI is asking for, right? Diversity,
Right.
equity, and inclusion. And then the justice is what helps us maintain that ability to be diverse, to
Yes.
have and enjoy that equity,
Yes. Yes.
and to include others. Go ahead.
Yeah. And the justice piece is recognizing that where there is historical injustice, there has to be remedies, right? Otherwise, all of the equity processes that you have will still leave people in different spaces. So that, I think, is the justice component. One is to look back and say we have to remedy historical injustice, and we have to commit to not do any further harm based on these kind of social identities. That,
And
I
that's
think,
the remedy
that is the
to
remedy. That
end that
is the
social harm.
yes, absolutely. Spot on.
And that we don't have a way right now. There's not a magic switch. There's not a magic wand, a switch somewhere we can turn to achieve that. That ability is going to go through a lot of education, a
Yeah.
lot of learning, changing our ideas, reversing maybe some ideas.
Hmm. Absolutely. Definitely reversing some ideas, right? Because though, right, like that social construct that you were talking about is in place. That those social constructs are taught and learned every time we practice them, right? and so we certainly have to reverse some of those ideas, those ways of being and knowing that have afforded us a lot of comfort. And the Justice Project asks us to kind of come to the edge of that comfort, to say, what if what there is something that's uncomfortable to me, but it gives someone else the decency and the integrity and the humanity that has so long been not granted to them? What if my discomfort allows for that integrity and humanity for them? Am I
But
okay with
I
that?
would like to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's where I'd like to question it right there.
Yeah.
How can putting someone else down have any ethical value? How can that be beneficial overall for anyone? It may benefit that one person that may
Yeah.
be insecure, possibly immature, but how can a social construct of any kind that puts someone else down just because that one or two or group of people all of a sudden feel better, how can that be of value on the whole?
I think the key word there is ethical value, right? Like it does not have ethical value, but it certainly can have more kind of monetary value, right? Because one of the things, and we're having this conversation um, right around Human Rights Day, and I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that in a lot of ways we have commoditized human rights. We have commercialized human rights, right? Like the things that uh, if I asked 100 people, 99 people will say, right, like food, shelter, education, health. Uh, these are human rights, but we have also commercialized all of them. You can make a profit out of food, education, health, uh, and shelter. So what happens then is, because we can do that, because we can make a profit off of that, we can justify putting someone else down.
And I love what you're saying, but that's why I push the word we a
Mhm,
lot because it is we. But
mhm,
whenever I hear the word we in types any sort of anger, hate, or prejudice, I want to distance myself
yeah.
out of that sort of we because that's not we. That is
Mm,
again a social construct that may be created by one, two, or a group of people that bring others into that group with that
mhm,
negative value. And again, that's, I feel, is based on that one or two or group's position on immaturity or insecurity. Because where is their value? You talk about monetary, then that group can bring up an exchange of funding finances with who they enroll into their groups.
mhm,
But overall, the we is a small we because when we put it out on the table, when we put it out to a majority of people, don't we see that people do understand when they're educated, when they have that knowledge that, wait a minute, maybe that's not right?
yeah.
Maybe they're not part
Well,
of that we?
I think the practice of human classification of us and other um, has has long existed, right? Like from the beginning of human history, we've seen the us and the other, and there is comfort in the we, right? There is comfort in
If I can sorry to interrupt you right there, but please continue that. But if I get her name right, get the name right, Anas said it is
Annalise, yeah,
the Annalise, okay? Annalise said it is the royal, quote unquote,
yes,
we that's being talked
yes,
about. Yes, Annalise, thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. And the right, like the comfort in we is what makes us justify our treatment of the other. And that has always been true. Why? Because we, the royal we, like to be around people who look like
Thing
us, sound like us, think like us, talk like us, walk like us, right? So there is comfort in that. And it is that same comfort then tells us, I am okay with doing harm to the other in the service of we, right? That is the trend that has gotten us to this point, where there isn't an ethical justification for how we treat the other, but there is a monetary and security justification for why we treat the other, right? Like the entire rhetoric around immigrants right now, right, is a perfect example of precisely that phenomena, where we have created a narrative that says that other is dangerous, and therefore we justify treatment of immigrants in a particular way, passing laws, cutting funding, etc.
and then who defined what dangerous is? Where
Great question.
is that danger that we're hearing? It's coming up of who is it going to cost and who has to
Mm.
pay?
Yes, that is the mother of all questions, right? Where does that definition come from? And more importantly, who does it serve? Uh, right? And I think the DEIJ practice invites us to consider exactly those questions, right? Like whose truths are we listening to? And in service of whose benefit are we enacting these policies? And when you question that, question kind of every practice and policy through those two lenses, what we start to recognize is that we are upholding some of those historical harms, where we've just gotten so comfortable with that. And the truth of it is, Mark, the even the monetary argument starts to fail when you realize that the march towards a more diverse community is inevitable. There is no turning that back, right? By conservative estimates suggest by uh, 2035, majority of the states will be majority minority states. That means who you're going to go to school with, who you're going to date, who you're going to marry, who your clients are, who your customers are, what kind of products you design. All of that has to change to kind of attend to this increasingly diverse community. So the better business sense is to equip yourself for that reality. You're going to make more money if you are an organization that attends to the needs of more diverse people. So even the monetary logic starts to fail at some point if you want to listen.
And I think that brings up a great point right there. And I think feeds back into what Annalise was saying that royal we, what he said, it's going to be the situation of are we losing some of the royalty in the we? Are we
Uh,
coming out to more of a strength among all of us going forward?
I think that's the aspiration, right? Like the recognition that a a more multicultural, a more connected, a more kind, a more loving community uh, is a is a more productive community. It is a more
Accepting.
rich community. It's more accepting. It is more colorful, and and I think right, like there's benefit. in working towards that. And that is kind of the DEIJ project, right? Like that's what um, I speak about when I'm in front of a C-suite, trying to convince them that, right, like, I often tell them this is that, you know, the fastest way to irrelevance in a changing world is to stand still. And organizations can't afford to do that anymore. They have to change with the world.
If they want to continue to profit, correct?
Exactly, exactly. Just to survive, they're going to have to do that. So, absolutely.
And you mentioned whose truth are we listening to? And that comes out to where is the truth? Because if we're listening to the whose truth, is it truly the truth? Is it fact? And that's, I think, one of the things that we come out. And I think, and appreciating Annalise's comments here, is it mentioned just a question of whose eyes you're looking through,
Hmm.
whose eyes are sharing that idea, that construct, that concept, and how
Yeah.
are we going to accept or not accept that as we go forward, right?
Mm. And I think part of that begins with the recognition that uh, there are facts and there are experiences. And embedded within those experiences are subjective truths that we have to acknowledge, not necessarily as universal truths, but at least as subjective truths. To say, this person experienced the world in this particular way, right? Like you might look at that and say, yes, but that's not how I experienced it. Absolutely. It is not, and it doesn't have to be.
Mhm.
But we can still be kind and curious enough to ask someone, tell me how you experience this world. And when they tell us, we listen to them with care and curiosity and empathy, and then commit to saying, I can do whatever I can to make that better for you. We can do that.
Yes.
We are good enough people that we can do that if we choose to.
If we choose to, and that choice comes from an understanding that education of what is good, and we always come into the what is right or wrong, and sometimes that is a very manipulative
Hmm.
process. But what is good for all in the process? What
Hmm.
can we, how can we benefit? As I talk about,
Yeah.
where is the value? And that's the domain I have. Where's the value.com? Where is the value.com? Where is the value in what we're doing?
Mm.
And how does that value grow going forward
Mhm.
without some of that immaturity, insecurity, and judgment of others?
Yeah. Well, so when I was doing my doc program at the University of Iowa, one of the things that I taught about is that education can tell you what is quote unquote good according to kind of dominant or
Someone's
normal, right? Dominant or normal
perspective.
concepts of what is good.
But aren't those still
Curiosity.
perspectives? Sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, someone's
I was
perspective,
getting
right?
to that. I was
Okay,
getting to
sorry. Go
that.
ahead.
Education tells you what is the royal good, if you will.
Mhm.
Curiosity tells you what is the subjective good, right? I can ask you, tell me what is good for you. Tell me why that is good for you, right? And this goes back to that idea of a social construct, right? The social constructs creates a hierarchy of what is good based on people who hold positions of power. The subjective good comes when you ask the people who are living in the margins, who are invisible, what is good for you. And so the idea then is to kind of enact this communication sequence, right? You start with curiosity. Second, you invite storytelling. Third, you empathically receive the stories that are told. And then fourth, you commit to acting on the story that has just been told, to say, I'm going to do better for you. Right? Like that communication sequence of curiosity, storytelling, empathic reception, and commitment to well-being. That is kind of the pathway to kind of contesting this idea of a royal good or a normal good and attending to the subjective good of people who are too often left in the margins.
I like what you're saying. We talked a little bit about how you got into the DEI in your world and come from Sri
Mhm.
Lanka. Can you share maybe some experiences or moments that significantly shaped your understanding of the DEIJ? What,
Mhm.
for example, moments of experience? What have you had troubles and what were the troubles and how have you experienced your work?
Yeah, I right like the uh I think the second week that I arrived in Wisconsin, I was walking down um, Catlin Avenue, and there was a car that drove by with some high school kids in there, and they yelled out the N-word at me. 2 weeks in the United States, um, and I, of course, yelled back, "I'm Asian, you idiot," because that was all I could think of at the time. Right? So that was kind of the first occasion of saying, "Oh, I'm an other here too." Right? So that was my first experience. And then I vividly remember a professor telling me, "Oh, I don't expect you to write as well." Um, um, and I was like, "Well, if you'd known me, you would have known that I used to be a speechwriter for a parliamentarian. I can write just fine." Um, right? But so so those were kind of early days of recognizing that, oh, there is something different about this. I vividly remember the time where I decided to uh, play club hockey, right? Like skinny Sri Lankan dude, dark skinned, deciding I'm gonna play ice hockey. And I remember the looks that I got saying,
So
"Oh,
I get this,
exactly," right? Saying you don't
you
belong.
know,
Yeah. Um, and so those were kind of some of the early days. Then uh, more recently, right, like I was getting, I'd met my life partner in Iowa, and we were, uh,
congratulations.
thank you, and we were committed to each other. And then the, you know, the U.S. administration shifted with some pretty harsh anti-immigrant rhetoric. And I remember my wife, my wife now coming to me with tears in her eyes and saying, "I think we should just get legally married. Um, I don't want, I don't want to take any risks with you." Right? Um, and to me, what that meant was that I don't get to experience kind of quote unquote normal life in the United States. That is not
Mm.
accessible to me, uh, right? Uh, so those were some of the experiences for me of, uh, okay, that means I have to craft ways of belonging. And
Kind
if
of
I'm going to do
fitting
that,
in, right? Kind of
yeah,
fitting into the, go ahead.
fitting in and questioning why I don't, uh, right? Because I, I think if we live up to the American ideals, we can fit in
Some
and
Americans' ideals, not
some,
all.
well, See, uh, here's what I'll say. The ideal of America, right? Like I'm a constitutional scholar. I've read, studied all of that, especially coming from an autocratic country. I've always had huge admiration for what America stands for. Um, and I think the way I see it, if we live up to the ideals of America, right? Like the experiment itself, you can fit in and stand out without any consequence. And I think that's where we're failing. Right now, you have to fit in. If you don't, if you stand out, if you are that skinny, dark skinned Sri Lankan trying to play ice hockey, there's a consequence for
Mhm.
it. That I think is where we're failing the American ideal.
Okay, now let me play with you a little bit because again, I look up to you and to the respect I have for you, but I'm going to try to play some. Okay, now let's look at this. Here I am,
Yeah.
tall white guy, and
Yeah.
by a lot of social constructs, I think I'm just a lighter color tan than others. But and
Sure.
Art still shared that with me. He says there is no race. Some of us are just lighter colored, some of us are darker colored.
Mm-hmm.
But when I went to Mexico, I spent the winter in Mexico 2 winters ago. I
Mm-hmm.
had some of those same maybe reverse prejudices in that process.
Mm-hmm.
When I
Mm-hmm.
went to France and Italy back in 2013, some of the same things because I couldn't speak the language. Now, luckily, my son was there and he spoke French fluently,
Mm-hmm.
but I was able to see some of the other side of those prejudicial issues. So when I look at Americans, I do see that strain of popularity that you're talking about here in America,
Mm-hmm.
but I also speak on politics with the what I call the riddle, RIDL,
Mm-hmm.
Republican, Independent, Democratic, Libertarian. Why is it such a riddle to build a better
Mm-hmm.
world for our children? Even when
Mm-hmm.
we look at those, each of those parties, and we just saw the parties just come out
Yeah.
huge back in November,
Mm-hmm.
just not just a short couple, month ago.
Yeah.
But the point I guess I'm making here is it's probably the theoretical 20% of the Republicans, 20% of the independents, and 20% of the Democrats, and 20% of the libertarians, and there's the other. But there's a
Mm-hmm.
smaller percentage of the extremes in each of those that bring
Mm-hmm.
out the good
Mm-hmm.
or the negative for each one of those. And we
Mm-hmm.
look at across America, and when we do a vote, if we could
Mm-hmm.
vote across America for something, we come together more on listening,
Mm-hmm.
but we always have that 20%, and that based on the Pareto principle, 80-20 rule.
Sure.
There's that, and it's not always 20, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 40%,
Mm-hmm.
but we still have that extreme being a minor part of it that aren't they, addressing a reputation
Mm-hmm.
for all. And as that's what, like I say, in America, we have a lot of negative attitudes toward us. And I saw it down in Mexico. I saw a lot of people that were American that would become aggravated because the person couldn't understand them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're in theoretically their country.
Mm-hmm.
You like I tried to do. I tried to speak their language when I was there. I
Mm-hmm.
did okay, but I know I wish I could have done better. But we portray a large percentage of us, which may still only be the 20%, a an aura that gives
Mm-hmm.
us that name, which maybe was that maybe just an inverse of a prejudice also. I mean, I
Yeah.
said a lot there, but go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, Mark, I think there's some really useful points that you're bringing up, right? And I think um, the evaluations aren't necessarily individual, right? Like one of the things that I often have to explain is that uh, I do DEIJ work that doesn't mean I have anything against white people. My problem is not with
Oh
white
no.
people.
Mm.
My problem is with whiteness as an ideology. My problem isn't with men, it is with patriarchy. My problem isn't with uh, heterosexuality, it is about heteronormativity, right? There's a difference between people and ideologies. And what I
And
would
that,
argue, oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, and that's a judgment. That's the people who judge others in a lot of ways,
Yes,
not in like you're talking
yes,
about
yes. Ideologies are,
justice for all, but we're talking about, go ahead.
yeah, ideologies are precisely that. They are evaluations backed up by power, right? I can evaluate you as good or bad, and then because of my evaluation, I'm going to stop you from getting whatever you want or stop you from getting what is valued.
Not that
So,
you don't deserve it, but I don't
right,
like you.
exactly that, exactly that, right? So that is, so the DEIJ project, especially that last part, the justice part, is not about people. It is about ideologies. It is about systems that encode ideologies, right? And I would argue that whiteness as an ideology harms white people, perhaps less than black and brown people, but it harms white people too, right? Like if you think about it, patriarchy um, is something that favors masculinity, but it harms men too, right? Like patriarchy is
It
the
does.
reason why two men can't have an intimate friendship, right? Um, patriarchy is the reason why men can't cry without being judged. Why? You judge and then you withhold what is valuable to them. That's what an ideology is, right? So a lot of what we have to explain when we go into C-suites or organizations is to say the resistance has to be focused at the ideologies, but you embrace with love the people, right? Because the DEIJ project has to be an addition project. We have to bring more and more people into the fold. We can't say, I I'm a DEIJ practitioner. I don't want anything to do with white people. That's not going to work. I
No, that
need
does not
white
work.
people. I
Or
need white
any other
people to buy in.
people. But then again, we're
Exactly.
all, again, Art Still just impressed me also. But again, we're just different shades of tan. Some are
Yeah.
darker, some are lighter. There's no really true black person. There's no really
Oh,
true white person. We are just different shades of tan. And why do we judge, again, that extreme on either side of tan?
yeah. I think you're right. There really isn't, you know, in the kind of objective sense, there aren't white people and black people. But whiteness and blackness
Yes,
as ideologies are very real, right? Like
very.
we've built an entire world based on those kind of ideologies. Um, and I think that that is too often the rub, right? Is that we conflate ideologies with people. We say, right? And I think that's where the value of curiosity in storytelling matters because that allows us to separate ideologies from people. And I
It,
fundamentally believe that we are loving people ultimately.
and it's that, like you mentioned, and so as we talked about early in the call, that caring, it doesn't,
Yes.
it's not about going to extremes, but just caring for each other to the point of saying, you're valuable too.
Yes.
And being able to
Yes.
take that and grow that forward, putting ourselves arm in arm without any kind of judgment. But
Hmm.
there's some of the patriarchs that have done well for value, and there's many patriarchs that have not done well by taking value away from others. So that's why I'm very stringent on trying. There's a percentage there of how much I'm trying about this. I'm doing something to make sure that we understand what we're talking about when we toss these words around. And I appreciate you just describing that from the whiteness
Mhm.
and the blackness of what these words mean. And
Mhm.
they can be different to different people, right?
I think that, right, the evaluation piece is always going to be different, right? Like to and um, but I think the construct of how ideologies work is fairly unitary. There's always the evaluation, and it's always backed up by some kind of power, right? Like what the evaluation is, what kind of power you actually exercise, that will change. But ideologies always have those two fundamental components. And so part of it is kind of like what you're talking about, resisting that urge to judge or evaluate, and kind of resisting this kind of exercise of power over people to say, because I made that judgment, you're not going to get X, Y, or Z.
Mhm.
Right? Like that, I think, is uh, the larger project, right? Like if we want to get to that idea of inclusion and belonging and justice, then recognizing ideologies at work and disrupting them becomes the central kind of uh,
That
form
is
of
that
action.
you make so many good points right there when you talk about that, Shindu, that there's so much to those points. Because one of my articles this week is coming out next Thursday will be about assumptions,
Mm,
expectations, and opinions.
hmm.
How do they work together, or do they not
Yeah,
work together? So,
yeah.
all right,
I will
we
look
have.
forward to reading that.
Oh, please, and
Yeah.
go to my markentrinken.com/podcast,
Yes.
/blog. I would love to have your feedback. Everyone on this call, anyone that listens
Yes.
to this, I want your feedback. And speaking of feedback, we only have a few minutes left. I want to just tell you again, Shindu, this has been awesome. I'd like to
Hmm.
have maybe just a couple of minutes, a little bit of closure of the good that you have done, and maybe mention some of the good that you have done, and what you and I and our audience can do to help this go toward world peace as we
Mm.
end the call, but continue on in making that world peace more accessible. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think fundamental to our work is the ethic of love, right? And the way we talk about love is, imagine if every decision you make is in the service of someone else's personal, professional, spiritual growth, right? Like if you have to make a decision about uh, anyone in your network, uh, make that decision with their personal, professional, or spiritual growth in mind. If it works to advance any of those, do it. If it doesn't, don't. So it's a very simple heuristic. Um, and we built Equity Labs on that principle. That is our guiding star. That's the only way we make decisions. And what I can tell you is that you can build a business like that and quadruple your revenue uh, in 4 years. We don't have to be strict consumers. We can be loving consumers.
We can. I like that. And that way that we can work together, that
Hmm.
loving, that just caring that
Hmm.
we are all the same. As I've mentioned before, there are only four blood types in this world. Four blood types. Some people
Yeah.
call it blood groups: A, B, and O. And no matter where you are, no matter how light color your skin might be, no matter how dark color your skin might be, anywhere in between, whether you're in South America, North America, Central America, China,
Hmm.
Russia, wherever, Scandinavia, Australia, we all have those same four blood types. So no matter where you are, you know that person next to you could be
Hmm.
your blood brother in more ways than one. That love circulation that we get
Hmm.
together to share because we are all the same. And I think that, and I could just carry that just a little bit further because we are all the same. And that love and caring for each other is only going to show the value that we can create for tomorrow, right?
Hmm. And I think importantly, we're all capable of love. I think that comes easy to us if we want to let it happen. I think we're all capable of love. Um,
I agree. And I think that's one of the things we have learned. We talked about culture and learning earlier, or somehow we talk about the masculinity that we think that love is feminine, so to speak, and not masculine by somebody's social construct. And they think that
mhm,
they have to be hateful or angry or spiteful to be
mm,
strong. And it's just not so, right?
mm-mm. You know, it is not. And that's one more way that patriarchy harms men.
So true.
Right.
Chenthu, thank you
So,
so much. I appreciate your time today. It's an honor to have you here. I hope we can continue these conversations. Hope you'll come back on the show in 2025, maybe something first or second quarter. Let's talk again and let's see what we can do going
yes,
forward to make this world
absolutely.
a better place.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
My pleasure.
Absolute
Thank you so
pleasure.
much. Thank you to the guest. Annalise, thank you for your comments. Appreciate all of you. Enjoy your day and hope
I
happy
felt like
holidays to everyone.
I felt like a real eavesdropper. Somebody sent me the link to come to
Oh,
this
yeah. Thank
podcast.
you all so much. Cheers. Bye.